If you love loud guitars, in-your-face lyrics, and a singer whose voice is a little bit rough around the edges, you might love the Drive-By Truckers. In fact, if you love two singers whose voices are a little bit rough around the edges, you might love them. The group has been a big part of the Southern rock, Americana, alt-country movements for a long time now, have been foundational as one of the most important acts in the genre. Drive-By Truckers are one of my favorite bands of all time, and I want to share all the things that I love about them in this video. So I'm going to start a little bit with just some history of the band. Founding members of the Drive-By Truckers, Patterson Hood and Mike Cooley, met each other in the Muscle Shoals area of northern Alabama in the 1980s. At the time they were roommates together, and they also formed a band called Adam's House Cat, which had some moderate success around the region but ultimately fizzled out during the process of recording their first album. Eventually the two moved to Memphis and things kind of fizzled out there. Patterson and Cooley were in a number of other projects together and separate from one another for a couple of years, until 1996, where, while living in Athens, Georgia, Patterson called together a group of some of his favorite local musicians to form a collective called the Drive-By Truckers. He had booked some studio time and basically just wanted to get everyone together under one roof and see what came out of it. Like many bands from humble beginnings, there's a lot of mythology around this early era of the band. At some point during this time period, the Drive-By Truckers made their way up to Richmond, Virginia for the first time, where they met Wes Freed, a local artist and musician who had been running and promoting a series called the Capitol Barn Dance in Richmond. And the group and him quickly hit it off, and he became an integral part of the Drive-By Truckers' career when he would start designing the cover art, poster art. Pretty much all of the symbolism around the band was Wes Freed. As they had been building a following during this period of time, though, in the background the band had been putting together this concept record project called Betamax Guillotine. So there's this old legend about when the plane crash with Lynyrd Skynyrd happened, that the band had like a tape machine on the plane with them, and the legend goes that when the plane went down, the Betamax player cut Ronnie Van Zant's head clean off. Patterson had grown up hating Lynyrd Skynyrd because it was the music that the popular kids at his school would play in the parking lot, and it took him a while to come to the realization that many of us know, which is that Lynyrd Skynyrd is one of the most misunderstood bands of all time. As Patterson puts in the three great Alabama icons, a lot of people couldn't see past the Confederate flag to see what was really underneath. Author Stephen Deusners sums it up pretty well in his book Where the Devil Don't Stay, how Lynyrd Skynyrd subverts a lot of stereotypes around Southern masculinity. Deusner writes, "Among Skynyrd's many graces was Van Zant's willingness to examine and undermine certain ideas about Southern masculinity, which is all the more impressive considering how he was doing so at a time when the rest of pop culture was lauding Southern rednecks as paragons of manliness. Think Burt Reynolds in White Lightning, Joe Don Baker in Walking Tall, or Bo and Luke in The Dukes of Hazzard. Gently puncturing those ideas seems to have been Van Zant's goal from the very beginning. He wrote a scrappy single called Gimme 3 Steps about avoiding a bar fight. Rather than portray himself as the scrapper that he was, Van Zant plays the coward, shaking like a leaf on a tree." The narrator of the song is basically saying, hey man, don't beat me up. If you give me 3 steps, I'll be out of this door and you never have to see me again. I'm sorry I was talking to your girl. Which just totally subverts that whole idea of Southern masculinity. And the whole thing with Skynyrd having this very conservative image and fan base these days is even more ridiculous when you dive into what some of their lyrics are about. Again, Deusner writes, "And then there's Saturday Night Special, which is somehow among Skynyrd's most popular songs. In case you don't get the point, Ronnie Van Zant lays it all out for you. Handguns are made for killing, they ain't no good for nothing else," he preaches. "So why don't we dump 'em, people, to the bottom of the sea before some old fool comes around here want to shoot either you or me?" Lynyrd Skynyrd's songs are complicated and contradictory to what we imagine as the 70s stereotypical redneck, and they've only grown trickier over the years. Patterson saw growing up a side of the South that a lot of people didn't see, which is one where black and white artists could get together and collaborate and build something beautiful. Patterson's dad's David Hood, a prominent session bass player in Muscle Shoals in the 60s and 70s, when some of the biggest hitters in soul music were coming there to cut their records. Patterson and Cooley both grew up in the immediate post-Jim Crow era, where a lot of things were changing in the South, and it seems that they internalized a lot of it. And that all culminated in the 2001 album, Southern Rock Opera. After multiple attempts at recording it, and several incidents that almost ended the band, Betamax Guillotine became something else. A sprawling, ambitious record, exploring Southern culture and history against the backdrop of a young, up-and-coming rock star who ultimately meets the same fate as his heroes, Lynyrd Skynyrd. Southern Rock Opera was a huge breakout moment for the Drive-By Truckers, Their music was suddenly in front of an audience on a national scale that it had never been before. Getting numerous critical accolades, selling more records than they ever had, getting write-ups in major publications. Right around this time, one of the most consequential things to ever happen to the Drive-By Truckers would occur, which was that their third guitar player, Rob Malone, suddenly disappeared. Not for any bad reason. I mean, kind of. It's kind of a dick move. Rob Malone had snuck away and moved off to New Orleans, got engaged without telling the rest of the band. This happened right before a performance at a house concert where a prominent music critic was going to be doing a write-up on the Truckers, and that's where they met Jason Isbell. If you know Jason Isbell today, he is one of the greatest songwriters of our time, and really just the king of Americana at the moment. Ever since his breakout album Southeastern in 2013, he's been on a steep rise in that genre. But before that, he was a 21-year-old kid filling in for Rob Malone one night, and he was so good that they asked him to join the band permanently. This kicked off what many would consider to be the classic era of the band, with Jason Isbell as the third songwriter and guitar player. At some point during this time period too, Shauna Tucker would join the band as the bass player. Shauna became Isbell's wife and started touring with the band. This period produced 3 albums: Decoration Day, The Dirty South, and A Blessing and a Curse. The band was on the road almost constantly. It put a ton of strain on them as a group. It put a strain on their personal relationships. And the group was also partying hard too, and no one was affected worse by it than Jason Isbell. Ultimately culminated with his marriage to Shauna falling apart and him being kicked out of the band in 2007. And eventually, years later, the holes were patched up, Isbell got sober, and started what ended up being the most commercially successful and artistically vibrant period of his career. Some of his Drive-By Trucker songs are great. Danko Manuel might be one of my favorite songs of all time, definitely one of my favorite Isbell ones, same with Goddamn Lonely Love. Decoration Day is always a highlight of the live show. I mean, there's a reason you still see Goddamn Lonely Love very frequently be in the top 5 songs for Drive-By Truckers on Spotify. He brought a powerful songwriting palette to the group, which, by the way, already contained great songwriters. Patterson Hood is a fantastic songwriter who can cover a lot of different range, from some very deep and profound to some that are just, like, honestly fun and silly. I mean, anyone that can write The Monument Valley and also write The President's Penis is Missing, I mean, that's talent. To be able to have that kind of range is ridiculous. And Mike Cooley is a sniper. Cooley's not going for numbers, he's going for precision. Anytime he puts out a song with the Drive-By Truckers, it's gonna be good. I mean, even some Cooley songs that I don't revisit very often, I can acknowledge are like, yeah, that's some damn good writing. And when we're getting down to what really makes the Drive-By Truckers such great lyricists, it has to go with the storytelling. Sure, Cooley can turn a phrase or throw a line in there that's going to make your head swivel, and sure, certain Patterson lines have great depth or great shock value to them as well, but to leave it there would not be enough. What makes them great as artists and performers is their ability to tell meaningful stories through their music and performance. One early Drive-By Truckers song that became a fan favorite and frequent staple in the live show is 18 Wheels of Love, where Hood tells the story of his parents' divorce and his mom's stepdad coming into their lives. Hood wrote this song as a wedding present because he didn't have the money to get them anything physical at the time, and it soon became a fan favorite because of the storytelling that Patterson does in the extended intro of the song, which got even longer as the years went on and the story kept growing. Cooley does a similar thing in another fan favorite, Carl Perkins' Cadillac, where he tells the story of the $1 Million Quartet. Another great example of Cooley's storytelling would be in the song Raymond Cassiano, where he unpacks the murder of the titular figure by Harlan Carter, the man most known for radicalizing the NRA from being a sportsman club to being a right-wing political organization and lobbying wing for the gun industry. The Drive-By Truckers have owned that storytelling element from the beginning of their careers all the way to their most recent music. And it's a big part of the reason why they've been able to attract and keep fans through all that time. With Isbell out of the band, there was a little tension, a little bit of like, what's next for us? The future was very uncertain. Had some new members join the band, John Neff and Jay Gonzalez, who Jay is still with the group to this day playing keyboards. But out of this period, we got my personal favorite Drive-By Truckers album, Brighter Than Creation's Dark, which is definitely like the most country-leaning the band has ever gone, but also don't let that fool you because there are a lot of rockers on this album too. Following this period, there was the Big To Do and Go-Go Boots, and there was a bit of uncertainty in this area. Some of the band members have talked about, like, they really weren't certain what the path forward was. They weren't growing the same way they used to and were worried about kind of slipping backwards. Also, at some point during this period, Shauna Tucker left the band for personal reasons, and their current bass player, Matt Patton, joined the group. This lineup of the band, including drummer Brad Morgan, who joined back in 1999, has been the consistent lineup for the band for about the past 12 years now. They put on a hell of a live show, and I hope they stick together this way. English Ocean seems to have kind of moved them out of that funk. It was very critically and commercially successful as far as the Drive-By Truckers go, and it set them up well for the next transition in their career. So set the stage, we're in about 2015-2016 as this album is being written. We're in the midst of the US presidential election of 2016, and Drive-By Truckers dropped this album, American Band, which perfectly captures that moment in time. And with their album American Band, Drive-By Truckers became the dance band of the resistance. This era produced 2 more records, both mostly recorded in a session at Sun Studios in Memphis, Tennessee, The Unraveling and The New OK. Personally, I felt like American Band was the high mark of this period in terms of songwriting and the power of the music behind it, and that things start to trail off just a little bit with The Unraveling and The New OK. The New OK was kind of a COVID project, but it also captured some really interesting sentiments of that summer of 2020. Patterson lives in Portland, Oregon these days, so he was upfront witness to a lot of things going on at that time, like with the police free zones and the secret unmarked law enforcement and all these things that we were seeing on the news at the time. Patterson had a front row seat to it, which led to a song like The New OK and also Watching the Orange Clouds Go By. After the 2020 election, the band kind of stepped back from being as overtly political in terms of their new music. Tours following the end of the pandemic, or at least the winding down of the pandemic, and the beginning of the Biden presidency started seeing a little bit less of the American Band Unraveling New OK material being played. Now you gotta realize, Hood and Cooley have been a musical partnership for about 40 years now. The two are 60 years old. And so recently the tone of the band has been really reflective. So in the past couple of years, we got the record Welcome to Club 13, with Patterson and Cooley reflecting on visions of youth, things they remember from when they were younger, and just basically saying, how lucky are we that we are alive? It's no surprise that they're looking back and taking stock and realizing, yeah, this is kind of crazy that we're still doing this at this point. But then also during this period, we have re-releases of The Dirty South with a new expanded, updated version of it. Currently, the band is on their Southern Rock Opera Revisited tour, which I have a poster for that right back there behind me. Went to see it in Richmond. It was a pretty good show. And it's hard to say what's in the future for the band right now. As we know, it's a very hard time to be an independent band. Streaming has killed a major revenue source for a lot of artists, and touring and selling merch seems to be a lot of what is left. So this is a good reminder to treat your independent bands well. They need support, and hell, even bands and labels need help. Yeah, I'm sure, U2 probably doesn't need any help. But there are plenty of bands on major labels that are not making a buck off of what they're doing. I want to switch gears and talk a little bit about some of the things that I actually love about the band that are separate from the history run-through of them. Thematically, one of the things that drew me most to the Drive-By Truckers were their thoughts about Southern identity and Southern culture, and how those come out in their songs. Too many people want to define the South as the stars and bars and the former Confederate states of America. Too many people are still attached to those old ways, and the Drive-By Truckers are not about that. They've always been scholars of the progressive South. What a lot of Drive-By Truckers music aims to do is get to the core of what Southern identity is, and that's a really difficult thing to narrow down. To understand the South is to understand that it is a place full of contradictions. On one hand, it is the site and political perpetrator of a lot of pain. To go from slavery to the Jim Crow era, and kind of the looming existence of racism in these areas. Not to say that racism doesn't exist elsewhere, but when you look at the secession papers, if you look at the video of cops in Alabama hosing down protesters for the civil rights movement, if you look at where most lynchings have occurred, there's a definite trend. And yet at the same time, the South has this kind of mystical energy that's been attributed to it in art. It's the birthplace of a lot of American culture, rock, blues, soul, and gospel music. There's kind of this expectation of friendliness and neighborliness that is associated with it. And some of our greatest thinkers and greatest triumphs of the human spirit came out of the civil rights movement, which was mostly concentrated in the South. And of course, saying that with the full knowledge that many of the injustices that they were fighting against were being perpetrated by state and local governments in the South. And that the core cause of the Jim Crow era was the failure of Reconstruction in the South. It's a very hard region and very hard group of people to try and typecast into one particular thing, hence the duality of the Southern thing. And I've always seen it as you can love something and still be critical of it. In fact, I think it's important that if you do care about something, that you're able to look at it honestly and talk about it honestly. I know it's hard when you're dealing with topics as difficult as racism, racial violence, slavery, the Civil War. I mean, a big part of the reason a lot of white Southerners can't come to grips with the cause of the Civil War and can't talk about it honestly is because their family had fought in it on the side of the Confederacy. But it's important to remember, you are not your ancestors. And I'm not saying that to try and remove any sort of semblance of responsibility that we all have. We all have a responsibility to do right by each other, to try and promote the common good, and try to heal old wounds. But doesn't the fact alone that you are not your ancestors make you want to do that more than it does make you want to wave around a rebel flag? It does for me. The drive-by truckers being willing to openly discuss class and race has made them a bullhorn for the progressive South, and has helped usher in a whole new generation of artists, creatives, and writers who have seen the potential of what the South could be and are fighting against the negative stereotypes, images, and the actual bad actors that are holding it back. They've always really had a finger on the pulse of what that looked like. And I think that influence is still being felt today. I talked in another video about B.J. Barnum from American Aquarium and the song A Better South and his vision for the progressive South, and I for one still believe there's a world where a better South exists. One that acknowledges the mistakes of the past, but also tries to grow towards a better future. In 2020, when Tyler Childers released his Long Violent History project, he also released a video accompanying it, sharing his support for the Black Lives Matter movement, and talking about a new vision for rural and Southern identity that he had. One that focuses on traditions that build positively and rejects the negatives of the past. Not forgetting about history, but also not celebrating it as the ultimate good either. I saw Tyler Childers last year at Meriwether Post Pavilion with the Drive-By Truckers opening, and Tyler came out on stage afterwards and talked about how they were the soundtrack to his teenage angst. And that's just one example of, I'm sure many, of great artists taking to heart the Drive-By Truckers message around Southern culture and identity. I just admire them for that, and I find it fascinating. And really inspirational, honestly. I mean, even when it comes down to the name Drive-By Truckers, the thoughts on that have evolved over the years. So Patterson has said he picked the name originally as kind of an homage to hip-hop. They were really big into like the Dirty South movement at the time and a lot of stuff that was coming out in the 90s. And Patterson said he picked the name Drive-By Truckers because he wanted to sell out the Star Bar, which is a local venue in Athens, Georgia. But as time has gone on, they seem to be a little bit less tied to that name. I don't think it's going to change at this point, but they've said in interviews that probably that name has held some people back from listening to them just because, I mean, let's be honest, I love it, but it does kind of sound dumb. If someone had told me they were going to go see the Drive-By Truckers and I hadn't heard of them before, I probably would have been like, what the f*** is that? And have all these weird images in my head that probably would have been mostly right. Even in recent years, Patterson penned an op-ed asking maybe if the name had been somewhat exploitative or picking that name wasn't the right choice. Personally, I think they might be overthinking that one a little bit. I still love it. And regardless of whether or not the name may have turned some people off, they've certainly made their mark on what Americana is, what Southern rock is today, and are defining members of those genres in their own right. I think there are plenty of circumstances where changing a name is obviously good. Hint, renaming schools that were named after Confederate generals. But I don't know, I think everyone kind of gets that this one is just kind of a goof. Harking back to that sort of mystical quality about the South that's so commonly seen in art and literature, I think one of the greatest ways that the Drive-By Truckers connect to it is through their artwork by artist Wes Freed, whose deep-fried surrealism pairs perfectly with the Drive-By Truckers. Wes Freed is an incredible artist. I have never seen another case where a band's like visual identity, like the sound of their lyrics, matches the art that they use so well. Freed had such a unique, interesting style. As you can see, I have a couple of like show posters for the Truckers behind me that have his art on them. I have multiple of them. I just think he was such a talented dude. I was actually in Charlottesville at an Isbell concert the day Wes Freed died, and Isbell made an announcement about it from the stage I hadn't heard yet, and it gutted me. Wes Freed is a fellow Shenandoah Valley'er. From Waynesboro originally, went to VCU to study art, then developed his own unique style and became a fixture of the local arts and music scene. I remember being at a solo show seeing Patterson in Richmond and seeing Freed walking around in there, and you couldn't miss him. You just see him in a room and you know it's him. But I mean, the Coolie Birds, the owls, like the dark southern imagery, old cars, like these like kind of demonic looking people with red eyes and like half-naked women and all this stuff. somehow that connects so well to the lyrical imagery of the Drive-By Truckers and the sound of their instruments as well. But if we really want to get to the heart of the Drive-By Truckers, what it really is the power of a true belief in rock and roll. Patterson is very open about his struggles with mental health, and has said on a lot of occasions that music is the thing that has pulled him out of some of his darkest places. I think a lot of us who struggle with mental health can relate to that. It so often is music and art that gets us back to a place where we can at least feel comfortable within our own skin. Their love and appreciation for rock music borders on religious, and has been even more inspiring to fans in the face of the genre's mainstream decline. It is incredibly cliche to say rock and roll is dead. People have been saying it since the 60s and 70s. And the simple fact of the matter is, it's not going to ever totally go away. I think even if it's not the dominant force in mainstream music anymore, it still is important and beloved by so many people. Rock and roll will always have a place in the world, even if it looks and sounds a little bit different. The days of rock superstars might be over. I mean, hell, the days of pop superstars are pretty much over. However, I don't think that bothers the Drive-By Truckers. I hope for years they continue to make and deliver music for the people that want to listen to it. Because rock fans aren't going away. And if you are a rock fan and you haven't yet, you gotta get out to the Drive-By Truckers live show. And it might be loud. It might be a little rough around the edges. I mean, those tuned down guitars certainly make it a lot heavier than most other rock bands you'll see these days. But watching them, you know the Drive-By Truckers mean business. Drive-By Truckers has been one of my favorite bands for 8 years now. I hope to see them many more times. I hope to hear many more new albums from them. And I just hope they keep doing what they're doing. To paraphrase a Drive-By Trucker song, I think us Southern men still need them around. Alright, that's a bit of the history of the Drive-By Truckers and some of the things I love about them. I hope this video encourages you to check them out if you haven't already. There's a wealth of great music at your fingertips. And just give it a try, you know. It might not be for you. It might take a little time to grow like it did for me. But once you're there, it's a good experience. I'm Brent Funkhauser from Red Moon Media. If you like this video, subscribe. I'm thinking about doing some more things like this. And if you're a Drive-By Truckers fan, I'll see you at the rock show.